Eric Burgess here with Music Marketing TV, and today we're going to be looking at two types of automation. There's automation that I call transformative automation. This automation is to take a sound from point A to point B, and it's very, very useful progressively because you can make a sound start off not so interesting and make it very, very interesting at the end, and you do it in a really natural way, a way that creates anticipation. So it's very musical. And the second type of automation we're going to be looking at is expressive automation. This is automation that's sort of used in the same way a actual player would embellish a phrase. So for example, a clarinet player might add some vibrato on some notes, right? They might do some unusual pitching as they shift to the next note in a very stylistic way. And these sorts of automations will take your sounds really to the next level. So let's go ahead and take a look at a quick example. Alright, so here we are. We've got our example here. These are transformative automations, and this last one is sort of the musical automation. And we are using Spire to sort of show this off. So let's really quick just hear it real fast. Very simple sound transforms to something pretty cool at the end. So there you go. At the end, we do this sort of drop thing, and we go from a sound that's this very short little guy all the way to this sort of nice big low thing. We could, of course, add additional elements, but I want sort of everything stripped away so we can just look at this idea. So you could have additional things coming up and in, but I just went sort of bare bones with some drums. We definitely could do some fun stuff with perhaps some vocals or something as well. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Okay, so there are a couple key things inside of synths that kind of scream for automation. So if the synth has effects, those are good things to target for automation. So we have a series of effects up here with dry, wet controls. These are great things to automate because you can bring them in and out as the music requires it. And this is something that I think we kind of sometimes get in the habit of setting a knob and leaving it, where if you were performing, right, that probably would not stay constant at all throughout the performance. Like for example, reverb changes as you play in the room, depending on if the performer turns or something. It's going to change how it sounds in the room. And these sorts of effects, these subtle changes are really inviting to a song. So that's what these are. So we have the shape wet, and what the shape is, this is a distortion. So we go from a sound that also can't really hold a tone to one that is really, really forward. And so that's what that is doing. And that just brings in an aggressive tone. And this is something that, again, as you're playing the instrument, depending on the phrase, this would change. This is sort of just a linear growth. So it's not quite like a musician, but the point is we're transforming a bit. And it fits a bit more to how I think humans would perceive it. Next up, we have a reverb, and this is just turning on. So we start in a very, synthetic space. There's no space really. There's no reverb. And then we reach one that is. Versus over here, let's just hear these. Versus over here. So pretty cool. And I'm just automating the dry wet knobs right now. We could, of course, automate other more complex controls and get something that is even more interesting. That's sort of the cool thing about these sorts of things. If you ever wonder where all these automations and some of these massive projects you see are, what do they control? So a lot of times it's stuff like this, where they just know, oh, if I automate this, it'll change, the high end. For example, if we were to automate a reverb EQ or early reflections or something, we could make the sound come from forwards to backwards You could also do this with the reverb wet dry, but it won't be as convincing. It'll sound more like an effect, if that makes sense. It won't sound like something that would like make sense to happen in real life. And then finally, the last two are sort of special cases. So these are things that change how the instrument plays. So effects are great for sort of mixing in things. But these last two do a little more. So the chorus is an effect to enhance the musicality of the performance. So I have these like do 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 that part, and I thought it'd be cool to bring in some embellishments right there. And so I chose to use a chorus, and at these moments you hear it come in, but then it like gets like phasey, but then it settles back down. And then we make it a bit more, and then it's for longer. And then it just sticks around. And then I thought it'd be cool to be like, hey, you remember where we were? This like little dinky sound. And then I turn everything back on. And then we have this big sort of thing. And you could really make this shine through with some mixing and things and just make it this enormous fat thing. And what's great is it's really simple, but it has a lot of room to just be big because nothing's really in its way. The last one is a bit different. It is the automation of the decay slider here. So if we have the decay slider down, that's what you get. Now this in particular is controlling the filter cutoff. So with the decay low, the filter is going to stay clamped, but we allow it to open because it takes longer for it to decay when we bring this up. And things like automating decays and envelopes change how sounds will behave over time. So there's like effect automation, which does like textures, but then you also have this other type of automation where you mess with things like LFOs and envelopes, where you mess with how something behaves over time. It's like kind of like how you would do staccato on a clarinet, and then you might play a long legato note. And if you don't know what staccato is, it's a short note. It's a detached note. So it'd be like ba, 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 versus like ba, that would be like a legato note. Ba. And being able to change how the instruments behave makes a lot of sense. And it will also be influenced by all these other things that we're automating. Any sorts of distortions, reverbs, phasers. This is going to change sometimes how it's perceived. It also depends on the type of synthesis you're doing. Like if we had FM synthesis in here, that could be, that could change the sound drastically. This is subtractive synthesis. So it's not going to change the sound very much. Usually doesn't in these sorts of cases. But that is what this is doing. So we start off with these short sounds. And then over here, not only do we open up the filter essentially, but with the shape coming up, we also get a longer, sort of more forward tone. And I'm deliberately writing really short notes to sort of still keep my rhythm where I want it. If these notes were longer, I would have these like really long, smooth phrases. Like let's just make a couple of these. No. So that could be cool too. Maybe another part in the song could do that. I mean, the real secret is variation. If you have a good idea, like I think this as a phrase is a pretty cool phrase. And we could do a lot of things with it. Just look at Beethoven's Fifth. He made an entire song out of just that little itsy bitsy motif. So we could do a lot of things with this, and the secret in production a lot of times is automation. If we also come down here, I have one other thing. So we've got some drums, but for the fills, I automate the volume of these in. And this is more, in this case, I would just call this sort of just mixing automation. So these could sort of be considered mixing, but to me, it's also more sound design. I was not thinking of mixing when I did these moves, but here, these are sort of mixing moves where the drums fade in to make them fit better. If I just had these at full blast, it would sound really abrupt and sort of out of place. But because I mix them in, that's where that extra little thing right there happens, that little fill. And I thought these really help sort of push the phrase. I would like to add a couple additional things. But that is the general idea of automation. So just a quick recap, you've got your transformative automation in the form of moving effect controls around. This is to make a sound just sort of progress as an interesting thing, maybe emulate how a performer might change their position on a stage or something like that. Usually just to create a point of interest in the sound, so it's not just a static sound. And then we also have musical enhancing automations, which what I mean by that is it's a performance thing. It's done to match the phrase. It's done to sort of be like the vibrato that a saxophone player might add in when they're playing a long legato phrase on particular notes. It's an embellishment. And then we have our behavioral changing things, like the decay knob or slider being automated to just change the way the sound would behave. And in some cases, this would be drastic, and in other cases, it'll be less drastic, but it's an effective tool in either domain. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If you make something super dope with this, let me know. Subscribe, hit that bell icon, and have a blessed day.